Hi, I'm McCombs. So I made a video a while back about issues that people have, especially when they're writers, about having ADHD, ADD, and dyslexia issues, and being able to read and then know how to write. The video I'm going to interweave with this video, make a whole new thing on it, because I think, one, it needs a little bit more pronouncement as far as the whole concept of if you just read enough books, you'll totally know how to write a book. For those of us that have problems like ADHD and dyslexia, or both in my case, yay! If I read a book, and it can be one of my favorite books, it can be a book that I absolutely adore, I tend to not read the entirety of the story, especially on the first reading. A lot of the books that I do like a lot of books that I'm very, very partial to, I've read multiple times, 3, 4, 5 times I've read them. And there are a lot of times I learn something new on each individual reading. There are sentences I completely missed, sentences I only half read, whole paragraphs I've skipped, complete context clues, foreshadowing that I didn't even know occurred in the first, second, maybe even third reading, and I'm figuring it out on my fourth. There's an author, Stephen Bruce, who writes very thick, joy for reading books that are very, it's the Havreen saga, which I adore those books. And every time I read them, and I've read probably those 3 or 4, however many there are, probably 4, 5, 6 times each. And there are times when I've seen something, and it's not that it was 10, 15, 20 years ago and I read it differently. More so, I missed that entire section. I missed that entire paragraph, that sentence. I read the first part of the sentence, the second part of the sentence, ran off the page, didn't notice that it existed, and so I'm finding new things out. So when people talk about things like foreshadowing, they talk about how to structure your paragraphs, scenes, chapters. A lot of that does not make any sense to me, especially growing up, which is one of the reasons why I was so frustrated early on, teens, 20s, about writing. Because one, the kids that had official diagnoses were the kids that were on the medication, and there was a substantial stigma to that growing up, and I didn't want to have that kind of stigma on me, and so I didn't do it. And there were several people that would actually tell me, oh yes, you definitely have it, and you need to go get a diagnosis, and you need to possibly get on medication or learn cognitive behavioral strategies to learn how to do it. If you do want to learn strategies on how to deal with ADHD and other issues associated in that cluster, I'd highly suggest How to ADHD YouTube channel. Absolutely brilliant, a lot of great things there. For me, as I tried to write, especially there's a video I did early on, very in-depth on how to write a scene, how to write sequences, how to write one sentence that follows to the next. I didn't know, and that book never made sense to me before I understood myself. I would put in, I would write a story, short story, novella, any number of different things, and I would give it to people and they would say it makes absolutely no sense. And I didn't understand why. When I would read a book, for instance, I make a joke all the time with friends and family about JRR Tolkien. His books has a lot of expository, especially The Lord of the Rings, about this, that, and the other thing. You come across a bush, and the bush is, goes through the whole genealogy above the bush, and that's why they are twisted in evil bushes, because back in the evil Baden times, Morgoth begat blah blah blah, which created blah blah blah, which created blah, and then an evil bush was made, and the 10,000 generations later, that evil bush is twisted and evil. And when I would see a page like that, or any number of different things like that. I would just skip. I would just skip until, you know, Frodo took another step and found another evil bush, and then I'd just roll my eyes, skip another couple pages until, and it wasn't that I didn't try to read those. Sometimes I would try to read them because they're so dense with description and the emotion that you're supposed to feel as you're looking at the evil bush. I just couldn't get past it because my brain would just go, no, that's just not going to happen. We're not going to read that one, or we're just going to, you know, skim it at best and just get the basics of it. For instance, there were many times when he would describe, say, Mount Doom, very evocative, but I come from, you know, I'm an 80s kid, so having the Dungeons and Dragons art and all the books from that era, 80s and 90s, reading JRR Tolkien much later, my parents did read it to me several times, but nonetheless, I couldn't concentrate on one particular scene. So if you say Mount Doom, it's a big evil volcano, which is very, you know, menacing in the background. That's all you really have to say to me, and I already have a visual view of what it is because I've seen that trope. I've seen that that particular type of thing again and again and again from derivative novels, TV stories, movies, from that. So when the poor man is trying to explain this to me, there would be no way I could get past that giant block of text. And it's not a, oh, I just got to push through it. I've tried this. Again, I've tried to read his particular books, Lord of the Rings, dozens of times. And you get to a point where there's just pages of just explanation on stuff that I don't really care about because my mind is going, ooh, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? I wonder what the Queen of England is doing. I wonder what the weather is going to be like tomorrow. You know, I'm really having a hard time with this poop right now. I wonder what I'm going to do for dinner later on. Oh, didn't I just think that? Ooh, I wonder, and my brain goes in so many scattered ways, it's hard to keep a concentration to actually read all those little things. So therefore, also, when I'm trying to read about, say, a book that had, like thrillers, mystery, horror type stories, things like that, just, they're beyond me in many ways. And it's not that I can't read them, I can, but I'll miss so much of it because you give me even a broken up. There's dialogue, there's description, there's action, there's lots of different things in a page. I might literally still only read 2/3 of that page, maybe 75% if I'm really lucky and if it's really engaging prose. Otherwise, I'm going to read maybe 2/3 of it to 75% at best. And if you put in a lot of foreshadowing and other things in there, especially when I was younger, I'm just not going to get it. People talk about, well, this is how you structure, this is how you write a scene. And I never got that because it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to say A, B, C, D, E, because I'm only reading A, marshmallow, green, apple pie, D, E. And that's all I got out of the whole story. And the intrusive thoughts that I would have, especially because I would think about, even when I was younger, I'd think about stories that I wanted to write and worlds that I wanted to explore in my own imagination. Those would come into play with everything that I was reading as well. So it was really hard for me to read any fiction with any deep detail. Even today, even I'm, you know, old and busted, when I'm having to do very serious study, I did a thing for work, was that 2018, 2019? I did that very serious thing for work, and it was very important that I study and I learn and I listen. And one of the things that people were annoyed with me about in the class is my leg is just constantly bouncing. That's a strategy for me to pay attention by giving myself a stem, a outlet of my constant energy. Especially when I was in college and I desperately wanted to get through college so I could get a degree and not work in restaurants anymore, I would sometimes literally rip off hairs off of my arms, my legs, even my face, to use the pain to pay attention, which I don't. It's not a good strategy. There are other way better strategies. Like I said, How to ADHD, go look at that channel. She's got an amazing array of ways to do that. So if you have these issues like I do, if you're having issues with being able to read a page and read the entirety of it, and people say, oh, just read a bunch of books, it'll make sense, you'll just get it by osmosis, that's not going to happen. And no matter how many books you might read, you may never get it. I've read hundreds of books in the 80s and the 90s and the aughties before I really started doing my own writing. None of it made really much sense. And the surprise that, maybe your favorite book has some sort of, surprising revelation, and then you read it again and, it makes sense, here, da-da-da-da-da. I would have never seen it coming. Maybe even the third reading of it, I would have never seen it coming because I didn't see that particular sentence. I didn't see that particular word or phrase or this relating to that because I skipped this and this. I got 1 and 3, but I didn't get 2, so none of it made any sense. When people say just read and it'll happen, that's not true for everybody. And I understand that a lot of writing folks want to say that because it makes sense to them and it works for them, which is great, and I'm happy it does. I wish it worked for me that way. I might have been writing since I was a teenager. Unfortunately, it didn't, and it didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The whole writing style, like literature, absolutely leaves me dry. I cannot concentrate, I cannot keep focus, and if someone turns a very, even if it's an amusing, joyful turn of phrase in a sentence, I might, and if it's decently long, I might read only a third of that sentence. And so the joy of reading literature is completely not a thing that I can relate to for most books, for most literature type things. When I was in high school, especially in early college, and I had to go to these literature classes, and we were just reading the worst things, and some of them were probably good. It may just be me hating on high school for a lot of reasons, but not necessarily that. It left me so awful. So much bad taste in my mouth. So hard. I remember in an English class that I really wanted to do well in, and the teacher would ask me very pointed questions, but it picked out a particular sentence in a page or a paragraph after the part that I knew about. And I would be absolutely flummoxed by the fact that I didn't read that part. It wasn't I didn't read the book, because the books were short and easy. The problem was, if you give me 100 pages, I might only read 50 to 64 of those pages. And, not a full page, but that would, total, if you boil it down. So I didn't get it. It didn't make sense. Well, why did that happen? What did that person say? I don't know. I didn't read that paragraph. It was boring. What did that person think? Why were they emoting when blah, blah, blah happened? I don't know. I don't care about emotions. If I went through that, I'm very empathic myself. So if that happened to me, this is the emotion I would feel. So therefore, I put that emotion into what I was reading, and I skipped the paragraph about their emotion because, hey, I got it. They felt bad. Well, what kind of bad? Tell me the language, the flowery purple prose language of it. I don't know, they felt bad because bad thing happened. However, when I read a story, I don't read like most people. Here's an excerpt of the beginning of a short story I've worked on that really I should work on more because it's a good evil story and it deserves a good rewrite. I'll put it on the screen so you can read along. The pain they inflicted on me was a pale shadow of what they were slowly awakening into after they found us. They burned me, they cut off limbs, they drowned me. They stabbed me through my heart. After I woke up, alive again. They kept screaming the same question over and over. Why are we dying? Every time I would laugh. Humanity. They didn't understand. They never would. I warned them. I wasn't supposed to tell them. We were only supposed to watch their death. When he electrocuted me, I laughed in shocks between that killed me. I think it was only 2 years before they stopped. One day I woke up from death. My straps were still in place, my chains intact. I ripped out of them, leaving fingers and toes that would grow back anyway. The thick gray metal door was unlocked. I walked out of the room naked. One of the researchers was at the desk. He was drunk. Around him, 2 of the torturers had killed themselves. Their bodies were starting to decompose. Their blood had congealed into a rancid pool of brown. He looked up at me, his eyes red with depression, mourning, and alcohol. "Why?" he cried out. Now let's read exactly how I would normally read the same opening if I didn't know the story and it wasn't mine. The pain they inflicted on me was a pale shadow. They burned me, they cut off limbs, they drowned me. And after I woke up alive again, they kept screaming the same question over and over. Why are we dying? I would laugh. Humanity. They didn't understand. They never did. I warned them. I wasn't supposed to tell them. I laughed in between shocks that killed me. 2 years before they stopped, one day I woke up from death. I ripped out of them, leaving fingers or toes that would grow back anyway. I walked out of the room naked. One of the researchers was at the desk. He was drunk. He looked up at me. "Why?" he cried out. Notice that my eyes and brain are searching out actions that happen, not descriptions, not setting moods. I might start reading a paragraph and lose interest, or certain words might be lost if a sentence structure is too flowery or disjointed. Words just might fall off a page. Thus, I'm only reading 2/3 of the words on the actual page. For school, even doing studying was pretty disastrous. To do the work, to study the books for this video, to extreme and focused environments to make sure that it worked. To keep me reading every word, to keep me from not letting them fall off the page, recapturing them, reading it over if I didn't understand it or if I just zoned out. In structured learning environments, I can't control. I end up being an exhausted mess. It's not going to work for everybody, obviously, if you're just reading and you can't read everything. Find out what works. And for me, it's the studying. And that's why I think I really need to concentrate more on this channel about doing this is how, for me, as well as for people who might watch these, the 5 people that might watch these in the next 100 years, they might go, okay, like I have a description one that I'm working on, and I need to sit down, write the script, and actually start recording it. I study it like I studied in college, less than reading it and just getting it by osmosis, because it doesn't work like that for me. And it doesn't work like that for a lot of people. If you have that problem, don't give up. There is hope. If you want to be a writer, you want to tell stories, you want to do things like that, and you want it to work for the normies, and I hate to say it like that, but it's true. You think differently, you look at the printed word literally differently than other folks do. You're gonna have to learn a way to communicate with those kind of folks if you want your writing to be any vaguely amount of popular and to be able to be read by the normies, because they read in certain ways. They might read, out of 100 pages, they might read 99 of it if you boil everything down to what they skip and what they actually read, whereas we might not. Learn how this works. Learn, and you don't have to be just a planner or just a pantser to do that. You can add it, you can edit it, you can make it work. You can revise as you go along. You can make notes to yourself when you think, oh, I should have added this, or hey, this is a neat thing to put in. Put in the notes as you go. There are a ton of strategies to do that, to make it work for you. Don't give up. Don't let your confusion on what other people get out of writing and reading, and your writing doesn't make sense to folks. Don't give up on that. It can get better. You can learn, and that's the thing. It's everything in the human experience, as far as doing things, especially when writing, is a learned skill. So if you learn how to communicate this way to make it work for them, then they will be able to read it and understand it, and it will make sense. The first several things that I wrote because I just went with what I thought was correct in my particular different way of thinking. It makes sense to me now why it didn't work for them. It didn't make any sense then. Now that I understand that, it's a lot easier for me to read these books, see it as a puzzle that I'm trying to piece together and make it work that way, rather than trying to create the muse that just springs the story into fruition and it doesn't work. And if I do it that way, and I do just pants, then I have to go back and be very diligent in this leads to this, leads to this, this is the issue, and then this becomes the disaster, this becomes the result of that, and this is the emotion that leads to the thought, that leads to the decision, that leads to the next scene, like I have in the scene and structure video. You can do it, don't give up. It's hard, you'll get really discouraged by you'll go to conventions, you'll go to writing conventions, you'll see your favorite authors online and they will tell you, no, just read 1,000 stories and then magic will happen and you will know all the things and you will be able to write all the stories, which just isn't true for us. Sucks, but there it is. Write, continue to write, always write. And you'll pick it up, and you'll pick it up, because writing is a skill that you can learn, is a skill that you can improve on. You may have to study it differently than other folks do, and eventually you'll get really good at it, and then your stories will sing. And in some ways, if you really put the work into the writing craft, there are a lot of authors that their first, second, and third published books, maybe not written books, are terrible because while they understand vaguely how it's supposed to work in an intuitive sense, they don't necessarily know, and here's the difference between an intuitive writer and a methodological writer, as Ellen Brock likes to say. That is definitely those of us who have these problems may have more methodologies to make this work rather than just intuiting how it works because, well, we just don't read it as everybody else does. You can do it. It'll make sense. The more you do it, the not more that you read per se, but the more that you write and the more that you study, it will come together, and eventually you will write a book where instead of in the beginning, you write your first book, it's you think it's amazing, you give it to people, they say it makes no sense, I can't follow it, I don't know where you're going with this. How do you even call this a book? And it's not because you're a terrible writer, it's because your brain thinks differently, your brain works differently than other folks do. Whereas if you work that to learn the skill of how to communicate to neuronormal people and make the book work for them, then suddenly they'll say, I couldn't put it down. It was an amazing story. It really resonated with me. And you're learning that in not only an intuitive way from what you've read, but also in the methodology of writing the book and making it work. So that way it becomes a more holistic book because you've done it in a totality that appeals to not only to people's the inner mythology that all of us humans have, but also in the inner cycle of storytelling that all stories generally have for humans. And you'll learn how to balance them both, learn how to bend them, how to break them, how to alter them, so it becomes a much more dynamic story than rather a kind of, this is what I've read, this is generally how it works, so this is how I do it, and you've not learned skills on how to change, bend, and break those rules. You can do it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be worth it. I believe in you. I believe in me. Let's make this happen. Have a great day. Have a great night. I got new lights. I literally just took some pink pillowcases, cut them apart, and made it softer light. So hopefully this light looks better for everybody, and it's a bit softer and rather than so harsh. I noticed on one of my last videos that it was very harsh light, so I'm trying to make it a little softer, a little bit more easy looking on my skin and in the light. So have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful night. Take care of yourself. Have a great life. Ian McCombs says, I love you.